Hello and welcome to the Empowered Expat Wife podcast. If you moved abroad following your significant other and are looking to create a fulfilled life on your terms there, this is the place to be. I'm your host Camilla Quintana and I'm so excited to be on this journey with you and to inspire you to create the kind of life abroad you truly deserve. Welcome back, ladies, everyone, to another episode of the Empowered Expat Wife podcast. Last week, we had a bit of a money talk that hopefully got you thinking and reflecting, asking questions, taking some action. And this week, I've invited a special guest, financial expert, and global nomad, Lisa Mitchell, to take us on a real deep dive into financial empowerment specifically designed for expat and diplomatic wives. So I'm super excited about this. Welcome, Lisa. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here and speak to all of your podcast listeners, a group that I know well, Expat Wives, Diplomat Wives. I'm really excited to be here and answer any questions that you have about finances.
Perfect. So let me just quickly introduce you to everyone. Lisa is an innovative global executive and consultant with over 25 years of experience in sales, marketing, and business development in the United States, in Europe, and in Asia. So she's been around.
Yes,
Yes. She's held senior leadership roles in the banking, financial service, and global education industries within Fortune 500 global organizations. She's also started her own brand that's called Living a Global Lifestyle. I'm going to provide all the links to that in the session notes, where she uses her global experience and her diverse skill set to really offer an array of content, workshops, tools, and resources for people to understand how to manage their finances and live successful lives abroad. And if that wasn't enough already, she's also currently writing a book on money advice for expats, digital nomads, and travelers, which I'm so excited to see and to see come out, which I think you said by the end of the year, probably.
That's what I'm working for. That's what I'm working.
Great.
We're close.
Great. And I was just saying before, Lisa is really such a heaven sent because, as you guys know, the real motivation behind starting this podcast was just the issue of financial empowerment in expat and diplomatic spouses, or better said, the lack thereof that I've been witnessing. And yeah, so I was really looking hard for someone who could combine some solid background in finances, some like real experience, applied experience, but also have this understanding and know-how of expat life and particularly expat wives, because that's what we are here, right? So I'm so happy to have found you. Thank you again so much for
You're very
coming on here.
welcome. You're very
And
welcome.
let me start by asking you, why do you think it's important for expat wives, diplomatic wives, women in general, of course, to become financially empowered?
Okay, so I'm really big on empowerment. I grew up with you should, no matter if your husband or your partner works, you should always have your own money. And I think we've seen over the last couple of months, March with COVID-19, that anything can really happen. And kind of with my long history, I have seen a lot happen. I lived in London during the 1987 market crash. I was living in London, and then I lived through 9/11. I was living in London again with the 2008, 2009 financial crisis, and really saw firsthand how the financial crisis impacted a lot of expat families. I mean, imagine if you're working and your spouse comes home and says, honey, by the way, I have no job. Or for some companies, it was, honey, my company doesn't exist. And I think most people don't realize that when that happens and your company is sponsoring your visa, you usually have only 30 days to leave the country. If you have children, they're in an international school, or what if you had your own job? That would be a really big upheaval. I've also, seen a lot of stories. Usually, when women find out I'm a banker or in financial services, they gravitate. I've also seen some of the sad stories where women have been, now maybe I'm showing my age. In the days, they called it the trailing spouse, and then they follow this person 25, 30 years, and then that person falls in love with someone else, and then they realize that they don't have their own money, they don't have their own resources, they're totally dependent. So I've had more than a few women come to me with stories like that.
Yeah.
So I think it's always important that, you have your own, especially in this world. And especially if you're a parent, anything could go wrong. About, what was it, 2 years ago, a friend was visiting us from China, and she was telling us how another friend, an acquaintance of mine, actually, she had attended one of my seminars. She was on vacation with her husband and he drowned,
Oh my
and they
God.
have two
Yeah.
kids. And my first thought, I'm lived a lot of different places, studied a lot of different language, not a master of any of them, but was, oh my God, like, they drowned in China. Do they understand what and we'll talk about medical as well, if you have a medical emergency. So anything could go wrong at any time. So I think, everyone should be empowered with their own resources. Everyone should understand the basics of the financial situation, the international financial situation that they're walking into. Another note I have here, since you mentioned diplomatic wives and you mentioned expat wives, and this is something I tell everyone: don't rely totally on your company. So a
Mm.
big part of what I used to do at both of the financial institutions is I banked the global corporations, meaning they would have employees. This is your top global corporations. They have employees they're sending around the world. They want us to handle the finances for their employees. Their employees come to it. A lot of these HR divisions, global expat division, global mobility is the industry. A lot of them, first of all, have never been overseas. And the other thing is, a lot that they do, they outsource,
Mm.
right? So if you don't have a basic understanding and empowerment, first of all, you can't ask the right questions. And I'm all about, you really need it's not about knowing everything. I mean, I've been doing this a long time, and I'm continuously surprised about what happens. It's about asking the right questions. And actually, when I do my presentation, I have a slide that says educate and empower. So I want, one
Yeah.
thing I realized during the financial crisis is, we can't stop what's happening in Wall Street. Obviously, we can't stop a global pandemic, but we can educate ourselves and be empowered.
Yeah. Yeah, this really is so important. And I
Yeah,
mean, we don't want to, bring you guys down, but it is just really crucial to also think about this because, as Lisa said, anything can happen. And so
absolutely.
let's talk about this, this emergency scenario.
Hmm.
What do you suggest should be done, can be done to avoid such an emergency scenario where you're just left without your husband's job or without his income, and you are financially dependent on him?
Okay, so that's a really good question. So here's my other thing that I say has not changed, has been consistent in 20 plus years: pre-planning, pre-departure. If you read my website, if you read my book, it's always pre-departure. Please, that is the most important thing that you can do. Finances in global assignments, whether you're going as a digital nomad, whether you're going as a solo expat, getting a local contract, or global it's still overlooked. People don't spend enough time doing that. So
Mhm.
first of all, you want to have, what do they call it, the money honey conversation, right?
Okay.
Or the honey
Well,
money conversation.
can you
Be
tell us what that is?
Right, that's okay. You want me, okay, so there's married and diplomatic spouse, and then, some countries you might be going as a partner. And I actually know a lot of my friends, they won't move overseas with their significant other unless they're married, because marriage is a contract and it's something that's globally recognized. So that's
Mhm.
first you have to think about, right? So those are the kind of categories I put it into. If you're not married, maybe you want to have a cohabitation agreement, right? Kind of like Carrie with Sex in the City, What will I do with my
Yeah.
apartment, right? What happens if I fall in love with the country and I fall out of love with you? How am I getting back? So all companies have a global mobility policy. So you want to look at that. You want to look at your contract. You want to look at your package, and you want to look for the exit strategy,
Right.
right? Are you getting me out of here, or am I getting myself out of here? And
Mhm.
always have your plan B, because companies are concerned about their business, their continuity, and sometimes employees come second,
Yeah.
right? So you want to know, all right, how are we getting out of here? Like I lived through SARS with some of my employees in Hong Kong.
Mm.
Some of that, we asked them, do you want to come home, or do you want to go to just another country? So you have to do that. The other two big things I speak about: immigration status and sources of income.
Mhm.
So let's say if you do lose your job, your spouse, so what does your immigration status become? How are you and the children going to stay in the country?
Right.
Right? Let's say, unfortunately, if there is an emergency and your spouse dies, what are the rules? Have you and your spouse decided? Do you want to be cremated? Some countries it's only cremation, right? Do you want to have the body shipped back? All of this, really, and I mean there's lots of checklists. I'm coming up with another one. You really need to think out before. Do you have access to the bank accounts? A thing
Mhm.
that's happening with people in the US, maybe you've heard about it, is FATCA, which is the Foreign Account Tax Compliant Act, which basically means that foreign financial institutions have signed on that they will disclose information about US people who have bank accounts.
Uh-huh.
So a lot of people, let's say a lot of, I just did a talk for women in Sweden. I know a lot of women in Sweden, their husbands don't want to be on a bank account with them
Mhm.
because they don't want the US to know about their finances, rightly
Oh,
so. But then what if you can't get your own bank account in that
right.
country? Depending on your visa status, you don't. When I moved to China, I didn't know some countries don't offer joint bank accounts.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
how
I've
are
had
you?
many clients who didn't
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
personal access to their husband's
Yeah,
money,
that's a
to
that's a
family's
problem.
money.
That's a problem. Then you need to have a third bank account somewhere, which I advise everyone to have, right? So you have
Mhm.
your home country, your foreign host country. You should always have a bank account somewhere else in a third country. Maybe it's just purely online that you can get to if something happened, even with COVID, right? All my
Yeah.
friends said never keep all your money, like my friends in China. So that's something that's again pre-planning that you're funding,
Right.
right? That's all goes into pre-planning. What about the insurance plan? Again, what is the company going to do? Or if you're a digital nomad, what you're going to do? Do you have adequate insurance? Insurance that includes repatriation of remains and
Mm.
evacuation, right? We saw with COVID, Germany put aside umpty up $1 million to get their citizens out. The United States, there's actually a form you fill out, which is basically a promissory note that you'll pay the US government. So you really need to know all of this ahead of time. Those are just some of the things that you need to know: how you're going to tap into resources,
Mhm.
how you're
Yeah.
going to tap into money. A lot of people, I always tell them before you leave your host country, don't close your bank accounts. Don't do it.
Yeah.
Always have access. And for the women that can't open a bank account, right? They can't open a joint bank account in a foreign host country. What are you going to do for your source of income? Maybe it's an allowance. Okay, if it's an allowance, then that means you keeping copious maybe amounts of cash, which I also recommend.
Right.
Always having multiple currencies, the top currencies: US dollar, euro, British pound, something that's easily convertible. Maybe if it's not that, maybe it's, if things get very desperate, maybe it's gold, right? Maybe it's other assets, maybe it's
Mhm.
Bitcoin. But you have to
Just having something to fall back
you
on, because
have to have
that was
the,
actually my next question. So,
yes, yes.
like the importance of having this money honey conversation that is
Mhm.
very unpleasant.
Oh,
Yes,
of course it
indeed.
is.
Get a bottle of wine or something, and just take one evening to just go through this, because as Lisa just pointed out, it is that important to know about all of these scenarios that can
And
happen.
also, I'm sorry to add to that, I just saw something the other day. Also do money dates, right? Because I also encourage people, if you're living abroad, you should do a stress test.
Right.
right? And you should be doing that at least quarterly. One of the reasons people started reminding me actually about currency volatility. I haven't really been following currencies really strictly since I'm stateside, but that's something you need to worry about. You do. Quarterly is a good one. And like you said, a money date, or I said a money date quarterly, where you're sitting down, you're reviewing, you're making sure that the bank account codes are up to date, the password codes, beneficiary, your names are on everything.
Mhm.
Maybe you've had a life event, maybe you had another child, you forgot to do it, or someone passed away in the US. And also a real well thought out and well funded exit strategy.
Yeah. And so you mentioned before, what are your other sources of income?
Mhm.
So let's assume that we speak about expat diplomatic wives that don't have a career of their own. They are financially dependent on their
Mhm.
spouses. So, what is there that they can really do? What are their options? I know you mentioned an allowance,
Mhm.
possibly.
Sure. I mean, the thing about money and finance, it's something that everybody needs, right? You could
Mm,
be an expat, you could be a diplomat. And we always ask this in banking, well, for compliance reasons, what are your sources of income? But I always ask this in my presentation when people are like, well, I'm going here, I'm going to live here. What are your sources of income? Let's again look at COVID and what happened. There was a real focus on loss of income. Now,
mhm,
I didn't panic as much as other people because I've lived through loss of income. If you have never lived through that before, it's
mhm.
scary as heck.
Yeah.
It is really scary. Loss of income. Usually in the US, the policy is usually borrow your way out of it. That's not a good long term strategy. I'm a
Mm,
big believer, if I can, in ABE, always be earning,
okay.
right?
Right.
Always be earning. So for women, so now is a good time, actually. This is actually a ripe time because the entire world has gone online,
Mm,
right? So you can, and I advise everyone, skill up. Everyone is good at something.
yeah.
Okay. Skill up. You can take online anything from anywhere. This is a good time to skill up. Now, when in sheltering first happened, I was happy. I could finally sit in front of my computer and pay attention to all these YouTube training and all the other. I'm trying to finish with blockchain. Whatever interests you, you can do it. And e-commerce, huge, because no one is going outside and shop. You can get a free trial for Shopify. You can go on YouTube. I have a business coach and she teaches women to be empowered to build their own online businesses, digital products. Trust and believe there is something everyone can be doing online. And
Mhm.
I'm a really great, you can teach online. I want to get back to the classroom hopefully next year. It's all going to be virtual and online.
And there are remote job opportunities also that
Absolutely.
look into more and now more than ever. So yes, I guess a bottom line is really try and think of this in a long-term perspective. I
Hmm.
know that when you follow your spouse along to his different assignments, it is really difficult to still have your career as a priority, and especially with kids in the picture and lacking a support network. I totally get it. It is really hard, but
Hmm.
still, you have to think in the long term. How will you make sure that you can be fine and independent, just in case something happens, and start building that today, like Lisa said. And we
Yeah.
had episodes on that. Building your own portable business, looking for remote job opportunities. There are so many things. It's just a question of letting go of something that has stuck to your identity that makes you think, oh, I'm not good at that. I couldn't do that. Just let it all go and think long term.
I really like that. Let it all go. And this is the time to do it, right?
This is
Because it's,
the time to do it. Like we were forced
yeah,
to.
and I mean, you might find, oh, well, I really don't like that. I'm not really good at that. Okay, move on to something else online. Who's going to know? Who,
Yeah.
who who's going to know that you didn't finish, I don't know, the certification in JavaScript or something? Whatever. This is really a good time to kind of try and find. And it's something also to tell potential employers. Well, what were you doing during this time? Well, I was trying to find out what's right. And also going back to what I said about pre-planning, you also want to think about this before you leave your home country, about the impact to your career and what you're going to do. As a matter of fact, a lot of people, when they move overseas, sometimes they don't quit their job, they take a leave of absence,
Hmm.
or they take a sabbatical. It depends
Yeah.
on what country you're from and what company. Now, though, I just wanted to mention, it's so easy. Maybe your company will let you work remotely,
Right.
right? I'm moving abroad with my spouse. Is it possible that this job can happen remotely? Often it's a possibility, and especially now, it's more than a possibility. So,
Yeah.
something else to remember.
Right. And if all of that seems really impossible to you right now, for whatever reason, maybe your kids are really small, or you're still planning on having more kids, or whatever, then maybe really look into having an allowance, just having something that you can put on a side. And you can explain to your spouse that this is not about not trusting him. It's just about being really clever for yourself, for the children, so that if anything were to happen, you have a plan B. And
That's
now,
right.
Lisa, let's assume that, so we just now talked about the woman that is totally financially dependent, let's say. Now, let's assume they either have an income, they
Mhm.
might have some assets back home that they can fall back on, maybe an inheritance or whatever it is.
Mhm.
So now, with this global lifestyle, how would you recommend that they can really take care of this money or asset, and make it last, and ideally make it worth even more? That would be an ideal situation.
I understand. I understand what you're saying. So, what are your goals? So, how is all of your assets? How are they going to be managed remotely, virtually, and when you're overseas? Right? Maybe you want to just have an advisor, right? Manage it for you while you're overseas, and you check in with them quarterly or monthly, and that's it. Maybe you're an active person, you like to trade, right? Like I like buying stocks and things like that. Is that something you're going to be able to do from your foreign host country? If you have property, are you going to get a property manager to manage that for you?
Mhm.
Again, what are you going to do to make sure that your investments, your property, your inheritance is growing? And again, depending on if you're a US citizen or US permanent resident, there are a whole lot of tax. You really do have to plan for it. And again, all right, how long are you going to be abroad? Are you going to be abroad 5 years? You're going to be abroad 2 years? Are you coming back? Are you going to need the money? Are you not going to need the money? These are all the questions that you need to ask yourself, but you need to figure out how you're going to manage the assets that you have. And obviously, the first thing is you want to make sure that you have some money for that emergency, right? In that third bank account that you can get to. And then you want to, hopefully, if you have investments already or money, you already have a strategy. So it just needs to be adjusted for your time abroad. And how actively involved do you want to be? Maybe you just want to sit there and let it grow. Although in the US, at interest rates at zero point 0, and some parts of Europe, it's negative interest rates. So you have to think about it, right? Because if you don't manage it,
Yeah.
it'll just wither. And that also too, because you mentioned inheritance, maybe that's a conversation with your family. Like a friend of mine was telling me this, and then I was reading this last night. If you have cross border and you have blended families, sometimes you keep the US assets with the US person, you keep the non-US assets. Those are decisions you can't really make on the fly.
Yeah. And I think that is the really important message here is to actually take some time,
Mhm.
ideally before you leave, and
Absolutely.
get all the information that you can. And then also, like, all the information from your home country, which
Hmm.
we usually don't have, right? So, what's the situation like in my home country? And then when you come to your host country, do the same thing. Really get to know about, and don't leave it up only to your spouse or an
Or
advisor.
the employer. Absolutely not.
Go with them at least, listen in or ask questions at least.
Hmm.
And I know, for instance, in Spain, because we spoke about inheritance, I know there are different laws depending on the province that you live in. So
That's true.
it's
That can,
not complicated. And
yeah.
even if you're not gonna do anything right now with this knowledge, but just knowing about it, taking some notes, you are prepared. So really this awareness that leads to the empowerment.
Right. I was about to say that that's what leads to the empowerment. Even if you're not going to do anything now, you want to educate yourself.
Yeah.
If you have time, I mean, there's tons of like online investment. I mean, I can't even keep up about because so many people want to move to Spain and Portugal right now, especially Portugal.
Oh,
So
okay.
there's ton, you can go to Eventbrite and you can just sit there and you can just soak up. And also because it's fourth quarter and people are planning, just information is power. And
Yeah.
like you said, you don't have to do anything. It's really about asking the right questions, but then you can go to your spouse and say, so what's our plan for life insurance? Or if you're able to go home, with COVID, I don't know how many people going home, but the next time you go home, you can have a conversation with, if you have your assets aside, you can have a conversation with your investment person or with your banker. Sometimes you can't always do that remotely.
Mhm.
Sometimes it is really best to be in person for that.
Yeah, that's great. And would you recommend generally
Hmm.
if you have any assets or maybe a property back home and you are moving abroad for a longer period of time, or maybe open end, or maybe period, would you generally recommend selling that?
I think when I speak about having a financial plan, I always say, think about repatriation,
Mm,
which no one ever thinks about, right? There's one day when you have to come home, or even if you're moving to another country, right? You may stop home. Where is home? And a lot of us got stuck without a home,
yeah.
right? So most people choose to do property management and it works out quite well.
Hmm.
And they use the rental income. I don't really hear too many people selling unless, there are a lot of people who are just like, I'm never ever coming back. And when they tell me that, I'm like, okay, if you have to come back, where are you going to live?
Yeah. Yeah. Never say never. We don't
Exactly.
know what's gonna happen, right?
Right. I always say, okay, that sounds great, but if you have to come back, where are you going to live? Yeah, but I that's a really good question. Most people do property management and they take the rental income and it works out well for them.
Mhm.
That's a
And
good
as you
question.
said, I mean, nowadays, thank God for the all the possibilities that we have online.
Absolutely.
Moving money, or emailing, calling even. I mean, all of this 20 years ago was really difficult, and nowadays it's all possible. So thank God for that. We're living at a good time to
Absolutely. And
go.
we could do a virtual tour, right? Let's say you had to make repairs, your property manager or your contractor, you just hold up your phone or your iPad and you're done.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I also wanted to ask you, just to wrap up, because you alluded to the many differences there are between different countries, and my audience, is international by definition.
Hmm.
They come from different countries. They live in different countries.
Hmm.
So, can you tell us maybe like the most important cross-border money rules and regulations to understand, or to be aware of? If
Okay, so that was a really good and an important one because there's a real big push about cross-border families. So you really want to know what kind of tax treaties there are between the countries,
Uh-huh.
right? So like the US has tax treaties with a lot of countries, not all of them, which kind of governs how your income will be treated, how you will be taxed. And I
Mhm.
think that that's the important thing, right? And again, in the planning, your estate planning, are you going to leave it to your spouse? Or are you going to leave it to your kids? What is it that you want to do? So that's one thing I would look at. The other thing is like in the US, has a totalization agreement with several countries which govern social security contributions, social insurance. And I think that those two, if you were those would be two that I would look at in terms of cross border for sure, because that governs how the money is treated, that governs how citizens are treated. I think I alluded to earlier this presentation someone gave, and there have been a couple where it's okay, so you want to leave money to your spouse. Is that spouse a US citizen? Are they a US permanent resident? Are they a non-US citizen? There are different money amounts for each person, or different ways that you can do that. So, but I think if you start with the tax, right, how will the income be treated, right? And what is, again, we always go back to income, sources of income, and kind of your immigration status. And for the US and countries like the UK, that's how it's kind of looked at, right? So that goes again to your pre-planning and your pre-departure and what you want to do. Those are key things to know, right? Like, well, let's take social insurance, because that's one that people don't think about. I've met lots of people who are like, Social Security, I didn't even think about that. Because usually when you work in a foreign country, you have to pay into their social insurance.
Mm-hmm.
So some countries allow you to take the money when you leave. I
Yeah.
think the UK, Australia, and then China started to let you do that. Some countries you just forfeit.
Right.
Again, planning. Am I going to retire in China? Is China going to allow me to retire
Mm-hmm.
in China? So that money is forfeited.
Yeah. Taxes, social insurance,
Absolutely.
inheritance, which we mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Just make sure you know about the differences between your home, your host country, your partner's country of
Mm-hmm.
origin, if that's different, or passport country, I should say, if that's
I like that.
different. Right. And now, just as a quick final question, let me ask you, what is one do or one don't that you would like to tell expat diplomatic wives to do or not do?
Oh, I love this question. Well, I still say do pre-departure. I
Yeah.
still always focus on pre-departure. Don't totally put all your trust in your employer,
Yeah.
right? I'm not going to say don't totally put all your trust in your spouse. I don't want to get in trouble, but
Key takeaways of this episode, ladies,
right.
is exactly that, right? What happens in the case of a pre-departure, what happens in the case of an emergency, not depending fully on neither your spouse, for different reasons that will be for different people, nor on your spouse's employer, because
That's
that's
right.
also a lot of power that you give to this company
That's right.
or that can make you very dependent and then potentially resentful. um
Absolutely. Oh, I like that. That's true. That's
yeah.
true. That's and if you this is why it's important that you read the policy pre-departure. They all have global mobility policies. They all have them. Just say, "Well, I'd like to see it. We'd like to see it before we make a decision
Yeah,
about moving abroad."
exactly. And you too have to see it, not
Oh,
just
yes.
have
Yes.
a conversation with your partner about this. Like,
Right.
get yourself involved, right?
Absolutely.
So I know that Lisa, she has a blog. She's also writing a book. She's also giving workshops. She's doing a whole bunch of stuff all around finances, and everything is tailored to, let's just say, global nomads, right? In general.
Mhm.
So you can find so much more information on her website, which I will link below. I have your social media handles. I will link those
Thank you.
too. Anything else that these ladies should know where they can find more of you, your services?
I think definitely the website. I'm constantly trying to put some new content. I just did started a Facebook group, but all that information is there so that we can have more conversations like these. I can do more live streams. My first live stream I'm thinking of having are the 10 financial myths that I hear people tell me about finances and living a global lifestyle. I think that's a good way to kick it off. But you can find me there. And if anybody has any questions, you can always send me a quick message. I can usually answer it. Social media is great, but I prefer if people just send it to my inbox at info@livingagloballifestyle.com.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually prefer, yeah, I don't, social media, you kind of never know where it's going and there's so much. So I prefer if people have a question, but if you want to join the Facebook group, that would be great because I'm really going to be using that as a vehicle for live streams and then Q&A when I do seminars. I don't think finance like this is necessarily a class. I think it's just like you've given me the opportunity, Camille, to really ask someone like me questions. I don't think you get that opportunity often. And I'm
No.
happy I'm happy.
And I told you how long it took me to actually find someone like you to come on
Yeah.
the show and talk about this, because
Yeah.
it's not easy.
No, and as we spoke about, and just so your listeners know, usually people, when you find specialists, they either only talk about taxes or they only talk about investments, which is great, but there's a whole lot between that. You
Yeah.
asked me also the things, not to do. And I would say not to beat yourself up over finances. Even with all my experience and my background, there were still mistakes that I made financially,
Hmm.
and the real one is the devil is always in the detail. Like, I'll just give one quick one, and then I want to mention, if I can, about credit, because credit's important. We didn't talk about that. Like, I forgot that in a lot of countries, your PIN number is 6 digits, and your PIN you should always know it alpha and numerically, because in a country like China, Vietnam, countries where they don't use a Roman alphabet,
Mhm.
it's going to be characters. I went to China and I needed money like the first week, and I was like, oh my God, and it was a real headache because I couldn't remember what. Those are the things that will drive you crazy. And those are the things you're not going to remember. You
Yeah.
just, you just, you just, that's part of the journey. That's part of the experience. Let me speak about credit for 1 second,
Yeah.
because especially for US citizens, credit is very important. Or anyone moving to the US, your credit history is everything. Americans are obsessed with it. So just to let people know that credit scores, and I actually have an old article that I'm updating about this, don't travel. So
Mm.
if I move to Spain, and if Spain, I'm not sure Spain is one of the countries that has its own credit bureau and everything like that, I'm starting as a brand new person.
Mhm.
Okay. But if you're leaving the US, or if you've lived in the US and you've had a social, or you're in the credit system, you kind of want to keep up on that as well, because when you return, you could be credit invisible, which means you didn't exist, or you could have because people go, well, I'll pay off all of my debt and close all my credit cards. And then they come back to the US and they're like, who are you? And you
Right.
can't get a mortgage, you can't get a car loan. And they
Right.
go, why? It's because you're credit invisible. So that's one that's pretty important that people don't think about at all. Other countries are not as credit obsessed as we are. I'm just looking at
Mhm.
my notes to see if there's anything. Yeah, I'm real passionate about the plan B
Yeah.
and having your own family plan B outside of your company.
Yeah, that is super important. I love that you just mentioned that again, your own family plan B outside of the company, outside the employer. And
Right.
I know that, for many finances, if you don't come from the finance world, it's not something that you may talk about in your day to day. It's not something that you may read about. It's not something that you might be interested in generally. But it's just one of those things that you need to know about. And if you find reading the Financial Times and stuff like that very dull, then go to Lisa's blog and find information that's probably better understandable and more suitable for your particular situation. But do really, just like with the money date that you should have with your partner, maybe you can have a money date with yourself once a week, once a month, or whatever it is, and just read up a little bit and know a little bit more,
That's
if that
good.
is not something that you already do.
Yeah, you always have to ask yourself, what are your sources of income? How are you protected, especially if you have kids,
Yeah.
right? I know it's a hard conversation, but if you have kids,
And
in a lot of countries,
that's the motivation to really get on top of your game and really become empowered, because it's not just you. Sometimes we think, especially women, we can be such martyrs and we think, oh, I can handle it and I'll
Mhm.
find a way. But think about the children and use this as a motivation to really get on top of the game.
And I also wanted to mention, Camila, again, kind of worst case scenario, a lot of countries, and like I know in my past, it was stamped in my passport with my work visa in the UK. They tell you you're not going to have access to social services.
Yeah.
right? So like in the US, maybe if something is, a worst case scenario, but some countries for foreign nationals, that won't even be an option for you.
Mm-hmm.
And you definitely don't want to get to that point, right? Especially if it's your kids. Dig your well before you're thirsty,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? You don't want to be, and I always say desperation is a cheap perfume. You don't want to,
I
you
like
don't,
that.
yeah, you don't want to, and it doesn't have to also be anything big. I'm thinking back to that woman that I met in Vietnam, and she had followed her husband all around the world, and then she found out he was having an affair, and she was desperate. And then she remembered her dad had started a bank account for her in the UK, and she had never really touched it or paid attention to it. I said, well, that's your ticket out. Call the bank tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, maybe it's only enough to get you out, but and get you set up to your family in the UK, but it's something. So
Yeah.
don't think you have to start. This needs to be, we mentioned Shopify, we mentioned Etsy. Doesn't have to be huge. Start with something small to
Yeah.
get you
Feel.
going.
And
Yeah,
knowledge again is power.
absolutely.
So, this has been so great. Thank you again, Lisa. I'm gonna link
Thank you.
all of your great resources. I'm gonna join your Facebook group. I cannot wait
Oh,
because
oh, cool. Oh, okay. We have to find another way to collaborate, because I think what you're doing is also very, very important.
thank
I
you.
do.
Because
I think like I said, when I started in this business, it was the trailing spouse, and that just, I mean, that has changed. You have an important voice and an important perspective.
thank you, thank you.
Yeah.
Excellent. So I look forward to that already. And ladies, I'll be back with another episode next week. Can't wait.
Thank you so much for listening. Please make sure to share this episode with your expat besties and show me some love in the reviews. Want more juicy content designed for expat wives? Then head over to my website, www.camillaquintana.com, or follow me on Instagram and Facebook at coach.camillaquintana.